Hi, I'm Pete Lockett. I'm here at Online Lessons to talk about the Indian rhythmic system and the vocalizations and syllables that we find within that system. Now, before we move on to rhythm languages and spoken rhythms, first of all, let's just look at a global picture, because it's not just particular to India that we find, recitation of rhythm. In the Arabic world, we have, dum and tak and syllables that are used for many different drums. Japanese kuchi shawa, which is the recitation you get with taiko drumming. Javanese kendang, which is a double-ended drum that has syllables. Awe drumming from Ghana, syllables are used. The batar drums from Santeria, and even modern-day beatboxing, and many other actual drums and traditions that use syllables for reciting rhythm that are then played on drums. Now, the thing that distinguishes India apart from these is that all of these other traditions are really based on drum sounds, purely drum sounds, and no abstract system as such is derived from them. So the Indian system is completely different in that an abstract rhythmic system is developed with the syllables. Now, these Indian rhythm language really been, it's kind of a pure science of rhythm that's been developed over many centuries. And we go back to the 2nd century BC, and that's the first record that there is of recitation and clapping. And if we go back to 600 BC, we have the first actual patronage of this art form. So basically, by that I mean someone was paying someone to develop that art form at that point. So clapping and recitation goes back, as far as we can, kind of see into history, really, in the Indian, area. Now, the system itself has developed so strongly because of this idea of clapping time cycles and reciting abstract rhythms. And one of the things that's quite different from this to many other musics around the world is this concept of time cycle, a longer passage of time that's notated with claps, waves, finger counts, lots of different ways to create markers of time. And what happens in performance is this becomes such an important and integral part of the music of North and South India that there's always someone or something on stage that's marking out where these long time cycles are, how they're, topped and tailed. So in the north of India, normally this will be done when you're learning drums and when you're learning different instruments. You learn to clap and recite syllables to learn basic rhythms. But in performance in North India, there's a different way of doing it. So say, for example, we have sitar and tabla playing as a duo, then if they would never both solo at the same time, very, very rarely, if ever. And so what happens is if the melody player is soloing, then the rhythm player would play a repetitive time cycle that marks out where the whole thing begins and ends. And similarly, the other way round, if the percussionist would be soloing, then the melody player would play a repetitive melody that specifically marks the length of the time cycle. In South India, it's a little bit different in that there's pretty much always someone on stage clapping a time cycle. So if it was a singer, then they would clap the time cycle themselves 9 times out of 10. If there was no singer, so everyone's hands are being used with the instruments, the violin, for example, or whatever, then there'll be someone separately there specifically to clap the time cycle. So this idea of the time cycle being conducted throughout the whole, musical all of the musical works in the classical music of North and South India, is critically important to understand how this rhythmic system has developed in such detail over so many centuries. That and the patronage of people being, paid to develop their art, in the same way that Western classical music composers were, brought into the court of a prince or a king or whatever, and given 2 or 3 years to write 2 symphonies or an opera or whatever, they were given to do. And so that's why some of these music have developed, in a very intellectual way, alongside other musics, the folk musics and other musics that have kind of been, going along in the way that they have been throughout time, with a less extreme peak of intellectual development. Of course, both musics are equally valid and great, and it's not a judgment that I'm proposing here, but just explaining how and why these things happen. So the concept of cycle is vitally important in this whole system, the whole vocalization system that happens in the Indian rhythm.